in and came up and sat down in the fourth row. Most of us would recognize that. And this church is very good at being friendly when people come in the door. But how would we respond if the doors were locked or if they just appeared in one of the rows? That's what we've been talking about. And it finished last week with a week later, Thomas was there, and Jesus took Thomas after 3.5 years of being around him, and because Thomas wasn't there and he made the comment, well, I won't believe until I put my hands in his, or fingers in the nail holes and put my hand in his slit side. I found that kind of gross. I mean, I know I hunt on politically incorrect, but it's not something that I plan to do for folks, okay? But in this passage of John chapter 21, it goes a little bit farther. And it says, after all this. So, next day, a couple days later, Jesus appeared again to his disciples. Aren't you glad Jesus arrives multiple times in our life? Aren't you glad that it's not one and done? So Jesus appears by the Sea of Galilee. And this is verse 1, by the way. It happened this way. See, John is talking about it, and he's saying, hey, I want you to know that Jesus showed up to us. And then he thinks about it for half a second. He goes, wait a minute, I better tell you the whole story. Do you ever know somebody like that? They're so excited about the main point that then they have to stop and go backwards and say, wait a minute, there's a whole life, there's a whole story to this. See, we do that. Sometimes we're so busy to get to our point that we don't give the background. One of the problems in the church, and one of the things that we're seeing more and more in the church, how many of you ever wondered why there's so few young people in the church? How many of you wondered why at 14, 15, 16 there's a huge drop-off from attendance, and it doesn't come back until they have children of their own? Am I the only one? Okay. I've been reading a lot lately about that phenomenon. And there's a lot of answers. There's no one size fits all. One of the things is that's when young people start getting jobs. And in the shore towns where I grew up, from Easter till Columbus Day, you work 7 days a week. Because if you didn't, there was no job after Columbus Day until Palm Sunday, and February is hungry. There's some jobs where you're the new guy on the totem pole, you get the Sunday shifts. How many of you experience those things? But then there's also another huge reason. And that reason tends to be that that's when the high school logical thought mentality comes in. They're a little more mature, they think they own the world, they think they have it down. And living by faith doesn't make sense anymore. And the church does a really good job of teaching what to believe. But we don't always do a good job of why do I believe it? The answer is just have faith. Well, the problem is when you're working with a society that says empirical proof is important, just have faith doesn't work any more than it was good for Paul and Silas. It was good for Paul and Silas. It was good for Paul and Silas. It's good enough for me. How many of you remember there was a song like that? Mm-hmm. Give me that old time religion. Okay? So John says, wait a minute. Let me explain why it's important to know that Jesus appeared to us. Verse 2. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, also known as the twin mind, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, said Peter. And they said, hey, we'll go with you. So they went out, got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples didn't realize that it was in fact Jesus. He called to them, friends, have you any fish? No, they answered. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you'll find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. How many of you have heard this story, or part of it, or it sounds like a story you've heard before in another place in the Bible? Then the disciples whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he'd taken it off, and he jumps into the water. Are you seeing the whole picture here? The other disciples followed along in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they weren't far from shore. They were only about a football field away, 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you've caught. So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat. They dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153 fish. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come have some breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? Because they kind of knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. Now I want you, are you getting an idea on the picture here? Are you getting an idea on the feeling that's going on? The first thing is Jesus shows up for his disciples. But why? Because Peter, always Peter, did what he knew best. What was Peter's vocation before disciple? Fisherman. What were the sons of thunders? The sons of Zebedee. What was their chosen vocation?
Fishermen.
How many of you, think about it for a minute, how many of you pretty much sit in the same seat in church every week? Most everybody, exactly. Unless somebody's sitting there. I've actually been in churches where they've asked people to move. Well, that's my seat. But what I'm trying to draw to is we do what we know best. So Peter's saying, hey, I'm going to go fishing. He wasn't talking about taking a fishing line and going out and getting a can of worms or a lure and going, zzz. That's not what he was talking about. That, for him, that's not fishing. He's going back to the life he understands the best. Throw out the net, wait a bit, bring the other boat around, scoop them in, pull them in. And of course, the sons of Zebedee are like, we know how to do that. Sounds good to us. And the other ones were kind of like, sure. I'm going to tell you, I had early in my life, growing up in Cape May, I knew some fishermen. One of them turned around and said, would you like to go out? And I went, yeah, no. I know how hard they work. Okay? I also know that the weather out there can get a mite rough. I don't get seasickness as a rule, but I've had it more than once, and I don't want to have it more. So I didn't take them up on the deal. 18, 19 hours of work at a time when you're not used to it is brutal. So they go out to go fishing. And it says that they fished all night. The way they did it back then was they would have their boat, they would have a net, and they would have a torch, sometimes a great big torch, hanging over part of their boat over the water. And it made the fish think that it was a full moon or a bright moon, because fish are gravitated to the light. Now I could go a whole sermon just there. Because the truth is, nobody in their right mind loves the darkness. unless you're doing something wrong. Then it covers you up. Now, I take that back for the people who have to work nights. I get that. Okay? I've known people who have to work nights. But it's harder in the darkness. So they would put that light out, and the fish would gravitate toward the light because the small bait fish go to the light. And if the small bait fish go to the light, the big fish come in. Now, for those of you online, you don't know this, but it was really appropriate that we had a special music today. And it was really appropriate what song she chose to play. For those of you who don't know, we had one of our teenagers on her viola, and she played Baby Shark. But it's very appropriate because the small fish get there and the bigger fish come in to feed. And the bigger fish come in to feed on the medium fish, and hopefully by your net size and all that good stuff, you can get the good fish. We're not talking the minnows. We want the food fish. We want the ones that'll make money. So they fish all night. They're used to that area. They're used to that time of night. They already know people. That's how they got the boat. They didn't just walk up and get a boat. And in the wee hours of the morning, just as it's getting light out, and the fish are seeing the sunrise, so they're not as attracted to the torchlight, they look on shore, and there's a solitary person standing on the beach. Now, having grown up by the beach, I can tell you that there's beautiful sight of a beautiful sunset, or sunrise, sorry. Sunset's 14 hours later on the other side of the beach. But I can tell you, standing out there with a bit of a fire, watching the sunrise is an amazing, wonderful experience. I've done it a few times. So the person calls out, as any person would. I'm going to tell you right now, you go to any fishing pier or any fishing dock, the first question you ask everybody is, any luck? How you doing? Catching any good ones? And Jesus calls out, caught any fish? And they did something that most fishermen don't do. They told the absolute truth. No. See, it's fine when nobody else catches any either. If there's a group of fishermen there, everybody's going to say, oh, had a line break, had a couple of nibbles. They just went, no, no luck. So they're going, no luck, and he says, throw it on the other side of the boat. Now remember, 3.5 years earlier, he had told a couple of disciple fishermen to do the same thing. And I'm sure in the middle of their ear, in the middle of their mind, they're going, is this deja vu? They didn't call it that, I'm sure. Wait a minute, I've heard that somewhere before. And this time, rather than being on their pridefulness and saying, well, we fished all night, we didn't catch anything, what makes you think going to the other side of the boat is going to make a difference? Like they did the first time, they went, okay, let's try. But see, that's harder than people think. We don't think of that today. Remember, they got used to throwing the nets a certain way. Your muscle memory works a certain way. You go to the other side of the boat, you got to do it the opposite way. You got to do it the way you're less used to doing it. But they said, last time we got a bunch of fish. So we'll give it a try. So they do, and all of a sudden, they have this net full of fish. Now that's a whole nother sermon that I can spend the entire sermon talking about that on. Then one of them said, I think that's Jesus. I think that's the Lord. Peter says, well, go and do it again. He had been working. How many of you, when you work, you get sweaty? Isn't that normal? And how many of you know that at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's pretty chilly out there? I'm going to tell you, the worst hours for cold are between 3 and 5 in the morning. That's when the temperature bottoms out. And you can be warm as toast at 2 in the morning, and at 3 you're freezing. But he's working hard. He's throwing nets. He's pulling in nets. They're not catching anything, so he's throwing them back out again. And he's sweating, so he takes his outer coat off. That's kind of normal, isn't it? See, I came in here today, and I knew I was going to be preaching. I knew I was fired up for the Lord. So my coat's sitting over there. But of course, walking across the parking lot, I want my coat on. He goes over, he gets his coat, he puts it on, and then he does the unthinkable. He jumps in the water. Dude, you're 100 yards offshore. Now, I don't know, maybe the lake kind of tapers off and then drops off at 101 yards. Or maybe he just felt like swimming. Why would you put your coat on to go swimming? But of course, after working all night, and you're tired, and you've had nothing to show for it, and you put on your outer coat, he was saying, I'm all in. I'm not going to be like last time. Jesus let it be known when we were on the lake, and if it's really the Lord, I'm going in. I'm going in full clothes. I'm not coming back to the boat, guys. Not this time. So as he's swimming to shore, and as they start to follow him in, because they're man down now, there's not a lot they can do. They have this overload of fish in their net, and they can't haul it on board, so the only other thing they can do is bring it into shore. And there's Peter. He's already gone. Well, let's row it in, guys. So they're rowing it in. They're following him. And as they get closer, guess what they see? Jesus has a fire of coals. How many of you know that when it comes to cooking, coals are better than flames? See, flames have different heat levels by how far off the coal they are. Coals have an even heat. It also means that Jesus has been there for a while. Coals don't happen instantly, do they? So coals mean Jesus had been sitting there. And if he'd been sitting there prepping the fire, he'd also been watching them. How many of you know Jesus watches you? How many of you know Jesus wants to help, but sometimes he lets you go through your paces? How many of you know that if Jesus had said it at 2 o'clock in the morning, a voice in the pitch black going, throw it on the other side? Most people are going, where'd that voice come from? They don't know what they're talking about. We can still do it this way. But by morning, when they're totally frustrated, they're willing to try anything. How many of you are desperate for Jesus? Now, I'm not saying you're not saved. Even as saved, these were his disciples, 3.5 years in his presence. It also says that it means they still struggle. How many of you know that Christianity doesn't mean you don't struggle? I had a boss, my first job, 15 years old. I had a boss, and one of his favorites, he had like 6 favorite sayings, but one of them was, if it was easy, everybody'd be in the racket. See, if Christianity were easy, everybody'd be in the racket. Everybody would go to the easiness. If good and evil were totally separate, and you could tell the good people and tell the evil people just by looking at them or by them coming to church, it'd be easy. But it's not. So what happens? Peter's on shore, he sees the coals, but then there's something else there. There's bread. How many of you know bread takes a bit of time? See, we don't know whether it was leavened bread or whether it was unleavened bread, whether it had yeast in it and takes time for yeast to work, or whether it was just a flat bread, but it was main sustenance of the time. And he had fish there. How many of you ever wondered, why did Jesus call out to them about fish if he already had fish? Anybody ever wonder that besides me? I guess I'm the only one, okay. But I often thought about it, I'm like, wait a minute, why is he asking them about their fish when he's got fish?
More to share?
Huh?
More to share?
Maybe.
To show them that it's him.
Just
Maybe.
Just something to talk about.
An opening. Maybe. Or maybe he anticipated their need. Maybe anticipates our need. Not because it's anticipation, because he knows. So they come in. Peter sees the food laid out. He says, gotta finish my job. So he runs back, grabs part of the net. They bring the net in. And this is important, and people don't understand it. It says they caught 153 big fish. Anybody know why that's significant?
No, what's 153?
153 is a really strange number, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're going to learn something today. Because in the Lake of Galilee, that was every species in there. But what he was also saying was, remember, Jesus and God don't work in a vacuum. Jesus and God, everything they do has a message and a purpose, right? How many of you know that? How many of you know that all those billions of stars up there are not extravagance? They're planned. 153 fish represents all the fish in the lake. What did Jesus tell his disciples they were to do? Be fishers of men. And that means if you're a fisher of men, where's your lake?
On land.
Everywhere. Of all types of people. See, he's reinforcing the message because he's the one who told them to throw out the net on the opposite side. He's the one who went, go out of your comfort zone, go out of your muscle memory, and do it this way. And they brought in 153 different kinds of fish. And the minute they get on shore with these fish, and remember, fish in a net are still alive. So now you have this giant net pulled up on shore. The fish are flopping. That may seem indelicate to some folk. I'm sorry, it just is what it is. And the fish are flopping, and Jesus, come and get some breakfast. They've got a couple hours work, killing the fish, cutting the fish, and then taking them to market. And he said, hey, you better stop and get some food. But then he says, hey, by the way, I've got bread here, I've got fish here, and they're still not sure it's Jesus. How many, now we have had 2,000 years to this, but I get it. I can tell you, a lot of those fishermen coming off the dock, they look alike. Most of them smell alike, and that's not a good thing. But here's what I want us to understand. Jesus had it all set out for him, and then he says, by the way, guys, bring some of your fish over. Not because, and we can say that it's partly because of sharing, but he was also saying, I've already taken care of your need, but now I'm going to give you, now we can bring in the surplus. How many of you would like to see surplus people in God's house? It's not just about bringing in the bare minimum. It's not just bare sustainability. And they sit down, and he breaks the bread. And I'm sure that they thought about it. Nobody wants to say, Jesus, is it really you? Because in their deep down they knew it. Why did they know it? Because he broke it the same way as he did at his Last Supper. He broke it the same way as he fed the 4,000. He did it the same way as he broke it for the 5,000. And then he took the fish and he broke it the same way. And he gave it to the men who earlier in their life, over the last couple of years, had taken the baskets and fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. What can we learn from that? See, the Bible is as pertinent today as it was then. The Bible isn't just a story of mystery and metaphysics and spirituality. It's also a practical guide. How many of you know the Bible's practical? Some of the stories aren't very pleasant. This week I heard a joke from the Bible. And my wife's eyes just got real big, which means she thinks I'm going to tell the joke. I'm not. But what I am going to tell you is this. The Bible covers all parts of humanity. Now, for those of you who are Old Testament inclined, there's a story in there about a woman named Jael, Jael. And an enemy commander comes into her tent because he's taken over. And when he falls asleep, she kills him with a tent stake through his head. Pastor, that's in the Bible? Yeah. Same way with a talking donkey. Same way with a king who was so fat that an 18-inch long knife got stuck in him and they couldn't find it. How thick, double C thick, do you have to be in order to lose an 18-inch long knife in somebody's fatness? Pastor, are you saying we all should be fat? No, I'm not saying we should or we shouldn't. What I'm saying is the Bible deals with human reality. We know people who are large, and people who are small, and people who are rich, and people who are poor. We know, I'll bet you if you go through your friends list, you can find 153 different character traits in people. By the way, I just picked that number because it said it in the story. I bet you could find more. See, Jesus is reinforcing his, I will make you fishers of men. Well, what are you? Well, Pastor, I don't have to worry about that story. I've never gone fishing a day in my life. How many of you, no, I'm not going to ask how many of you have never fished. Okay, I'm not going to ask that. But what I am going to say is this. According to the new polls, 98% of people who call themselves Christian will never tell a living person about Jesus other than their immediate family. That means that all the people who are bringing foreigners, outsiders, non-family members into the kingdom is 2%. How many people do you think 2% of any group can reach? What would have happened if 2% of the disciples had said, yeah, we'll follow you? What would have happened if only 2% of the disciples had said, you know what, we'll go around the world? Now, God would cause a blessing, wouldn't he? But he did a lot better with 11 out of 12 than 2%. What are we doing? Are we waiting for Jesus to say, how many fish you got? How many of you caught a fish in the last couple of years? I don't mean one of these. I don't even mean one of these with a net. I mean for the Lord. Well, Pastor, I've not been trained. What's there to be trained about? These guys hadn't been trained. Jesus had walked with them for 3.5 years and they didn't remember. How many of you remember what you were like before you were saved? You remember yourself? Maybe if you don't, you need to revisit yourself. Now I'm going to tell you, it was hard for me. I got saved at about 8 years old. I really didn't do big sin. My mom and dad wouldn't let me. I remember Bobby Mathis. I was sitting in the choir one Sunday morning, and Bobby Mathis turned around and gave me a one-finger salute from the front row of the church. I stuck my tongue out at him and I got swatted. But I remember the attitudes I had. I remember the selfishness that I was. Is it 100% gone? No, there's times I'm selfish. The Lord's working on it. Are there times I want my own way? How many of you know there's times you want your own way? Just because you want your own way. How many of you don't want to tell people about Jesus because you're scared? Now, I know some of you this morning, when Anna was playing her song, some of you were sitting there going, I'm glad she's playing, but really? Baby Shark? Some of you were going, I don't even know the song. But here's what happened. She gave an offering to the Lord of what she knew. She didn't play for you guys, although you were here. She was playing to God.
Mhm.
And you know what? God likes baby shark.
Mhm.
And he likes mommy shark and daddy shark and grandpa shark.
Grandma
Grandma
shark.
shark and uncle shark. And all the other sharks. But I know she had her stress ball with her and she was scared. So don't tell me that telling people about Jesus is easy. It's scary. Well, Pastor, you've been trained. And my knees knock. Yesterday, we were at the Cape May Ren Fair, and I dressed as a monk. Real typecasting, right? And every time I saw a monk, somebody dressed like me, I walk up and go, "Hail, brother, what monastery are you from?" And it was amazing because some of them were going, where do you live? Oh. But I think I was the only monk who was a pastor. I'll also tell you there were some witches there. And I can tell you that there were some people there who were not very nice human beings. In fact, one of them I talked to was really interested until I mentioned that I was a pastor. Then they got busy real fast somewhere else. And that was hard. It was hard for me and it was hard for them. But Jesus has prepared himself to sustain you even when you've worked all night and thrown the net over and nothing has bitten on it. How many of you know that sometimes it's hard to invite people to church and they say, "Oh yeah, sometime. How about next week?" No. How about the week after? Busy. Well, I'll let you know when I'm ready. 9 times out of 10, they never call. Let's not kid anybody. And there's times that Jesus says, go out of the comfort zone and throw the net on the other side. And you're tired. And you don't see it. Sitting in this church, we're about the same size we've been for years. And some of us, I just don't know any non-Christians. Well, then you need to meet some folk. Some of you are just like, well, everybody I know is a Christian. Find somebody. I had a pastor one time handed everybody a Lego block. Some were single blocks, some of them were double blocks, some of them were 4 blocks, 8 blocks. One guy had this whole square. It was like a square like that. And he says, this is you as a Christian. And once you form your circle, and there's so many knobs on top, and there's so many divots on the bottom, and once that's full, you got nothing else to do. But if that's full, and some of them are, and all of them are Christian, you need to pull some of them off and find some non-Christians. Because the wall of Christianity only grows on the outer edges where there's room. By the way, we at church, we have some room, don't we? There are some empty seats. And there's a whole lot more people out there than there are seats in this building. Jesus wants you to be a fisher of men and women and boys and girls and grandmas and pops. And he'll prepare you, he'll sustain you. Amen? Dear Lord, we ask that you would give us a heart to see the miracle, that we would go out of our way and maybe throw the net on the other side. Throw a net out where we don't think there's any fish. Because, Lord, you have 153 fish ready for us. We'll say thank you, Jesus. Because when we come in with those nets straining and we're not sure how to handle it or what to do with it, you've already got sustenance and strength. And Lord, we love you. Thank you, Jesus, for who you are.